CBC reporter Chad Pawson joins me here in our studio. Hi, Chad.
Michelle.
Welcome back. So 24 hours since we have talked. Give us the rundown of yesterday and how this election was called.
Yeah, I think the big thing to take away from yesterday is we had election night where we had all these votes cast and we didn't have a firm grip on who's going to form power. Then we had a week where there was different types of counting happening. We then had a weekend where they counted the mail-in ballots. So I think around 45,000 mail-in ballots. So think of it, 2.1 million voters cast a ballot out of 3.5. So we're around 58, 59% voter turnout at this point is what we're being told. That didn't decide it. 45,000 mail-in votes are now counted. That didn't decide it. We go to yesterday where we have more than 20,000 absentee votes being counted. So these are people who went and voted in a different riding from their electoral office that they live in or district office that they live in, counting those votes. And then finally we get to the place where we can say NDP has won 46 seats for sure. So it's enough to form a government. Minority, we're not sure. Majority, not sure. They would need the Green support. And anyways,
I'm going to jump in right now. Let's go live to Victoria.
Jackpot. Ready to go? Great. Good morning, everybody. It's very good to see you. I'm glad to see you. I'm glad to be here. It was an eventful campaign. Let me start by reflecting on the election result. I think this was a message that was sent certainly to me, to our government from British Columbians, that they expect us to do better on a number of key files. But equally, it was the opportunity for us to do better. And I am very grateful and honored by the opportunity presented by British Columbians to be able to do just that with the team that we're bringing to the legislature. The electeds that we're bringing to Victoria following yesterday's results are one of the most diverse and qualified groups of MLAs that this legislature has ever seen. I'm incredibly proud of them. They represent the first time ever in this province that the NDP has been elected 3 times to serve, and we take that honor very seriously. And our goal here is to make sure that this place behind me works for British Columbians, especially on the priorities that were so evident during the campaign. Cost of living, the pressure that people are feeling on their monthly bills at the end of every month, feeling like they're just getting by or not even getting by, let alone getting ahead. The need for affordable housing, strong and safe communities, addressing big challenges like climate change, making sure this province is a welcoming place for everybody, and ensuring a strong healthcare system from corner to corner to corner of this beautiful province that we call home. That's what our work will be going forward. I'm honored to be asked to take it on. I met with the Lieutenant Governor, advised her that I believed that we could deliver the confidence of the legislature, and she invited us to form government. That work is underway. And I'm happy to take your questions and look forward to doing the work for British Columbians on the priorities they've sent us to work on.
Thanks everyone for joining us today. We have members of the media here in person as well as those on the phone line. For those on the phone line, please press *1 to enter the queue. All members of the media will be limited to 1 question and 1 follow-up. We're going to begin today with Richard Zussman from Global News. Go ahead, Richard.
When should we expect to be back here in a session? What is the priority for that? And are you going to be having negotiations with the Greens, even though you have now a majority government?
Well, there are 2 important pieces of work to do here. The first is we've got to choose a cabinet and make sure that that piece of work is done so that we can begin delivering for British Columbians. And the second is to make sure that the legislature works as well. And so having a sitting in the fall, the election and selection of a speaker, I would very much like to be able to do that and to get the legislature working as well. These are 2 important pieces of work. And beyond that, the conversations that are taking place with MLAs in the legislature are underway. Our goal is to work with any MLA that wants to make sure that this place works for British Columbians on those priorities that I laid out: cost of living, housing, healthcare, what matters to British Columbians. And so to that end, we're meeting with the Greens today. We're going to continue to have those conversations with them. And the invitation is open to all MLAs If you're committed to these things, as well as committed to ensuring that this province remains a place welcoming to everybody, where we fight racism and hatred, then I'm happy to work with you.
And Richard, do you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, California announced today some additional support for the film industry. It was something you promised during the campaign. Should we expect more here in British Columbia to try to keep up with the incentives California is putting in place in order to ensure that the sector can thrive here?
The message to film workers in British Columbia, who I know are feeling a lot of the pressures of the big streamers dialing back their budgets and other pressures facing the industry, is that we're in your corner. We're going to work with you to make sure that our industry is competitive, and we know that if we're competitive, we can bring in the big productions. And we're not going to be able to outbid the lowest common denominator bidders in the United States. But if we're competitive, combined with the amazing crews that we have here and the teams that we have, we can deliver some of the biggest productions available, given what we offer here in the province. And that's my commitment to them. We're going to work with you to make sure we're competitive and landing those big productions.
Our next question will come from Rob Buffum from CTV News. Go ahead, Rob.
Hi, Premier. Congratulations. Just hoping you can provide maybe a little bit more detail in terms of when a cabinet would be sworn in and when you expect a fall session. Would it be in November, the fall session? Is it more likely in December? Just some ballpark ideas there.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. We're a little bit in the hands of Elections BC here. The judicial recounts need to be complete, in my opinion, before we select the cabinet and have them sworn in. So we'll work with Elections BC on those timelines, but our goal will be as soon as possible after those results are finalized to have the cabinet in place and get to work for British Columbians.
And
Was the cabinet and the fall session, would that be December?
So the goal is to get the cabinet sworn in, and then we're going to be able to have the fall sitting.
In December, November, you don't know?
It's hard. It's very dependent on Elections BC, the timing going forward here.
You made the point earlier in a press conference, and I think your team have said that you and your team have been reaching out to Conservatives as well, and the idea of maybe a Conservative Speaker of the House. Wanted to get your thoughts on whether that might be possible. I'm thinking of a candidate in Chilliwack, Cultus Lake, Warbus. There, I mean, can you tell us, might we be looking at a Conservative Speaker of the House? Is that a possibility?
Well, I have had the opportunity to work with a number of people who were elected under the Conservative banner. They worked as BC Liberals and then as BC United. I haven't had the opportunity to work with all of the people who were elected as Conservatives in the recent election, but my commitment to every MLA that was elected is if you share our values around making sure this is a welcoming province for everyone, that we're going to fight hate and racism, these are non-negotiables for us, then we're happy to work with you to make sure that the legislature behind me works for British Columbians on those priorities that we all share. And so it's an open invitation to any MLA to work with us. There are a number of ways that MLAs could work with us to deliver for British Columbians. One of those ways is certainly Speaker. I know we've got some great candidates on our bench. I'm sure the Greens would be able to put forward a good Speaker, maybe the Conservatives. We're not ruling anything out.
our next question will come from Les Lane from the Times-Colonist. Go ahead, Les.
Thanks. Thanks. Premier, election night, one of the first thoughts you had 11 o'clock or so was that you would absolutely acknowledge John Rustad speaking to people's frustrations with affordability, cost of living, and public safety and crime. I was just wondering, since that was your kind of initial outlay, is that how you this thing almost got away from you?
I think that there are two parts to British Columbians' message to us. One is they absolutely want us to do better on those pieces. I think the Conservatives did a good job of speaking to people about issues that they're concerned about in their communities, public safety, that they're concerned about at home, affordability. Obviously, there were significant gaps between us and the Conservatives. I think the Greens did a good job speaking to British Columbians on issues of bureaucracy in the healthcare system and needing to get that closer to the communities that they serve through initiatives like their community health centers. And so for us, when you have a close election like this, where the vote was often split between us and the Greens and the Conservatives very tightly in different communities across the province, I think the message for us is to hear that and to both be appreciative of the opportunity British Columbians are presenting us to deliver on that message that they sent to us, but also recognize that we're going to need to work across the aisle on different initiatives to make sure we're responding to the message that we heard.
Do you have a follow-up question?
And you're building a cabinet. I'm just wondering about the interior BC, everywhere north of Hope. Those pretty slim pickings compared to the previous legislature. I don't have the count in front of me. You got maybe half a dozen, fewer than before. Is that a consideration? How are you going to represent or show some representation in cabinet from the mainland BC?
Yeah, we've elected some great MLAs from outside the Lower Mainland, but you're right. I do see an urban-rural divide in the election results that's very concerning to me. We need to govern for the entire province. We need to represent the entire province, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to make sure that we're finding ways to reach out to and engage rural communities and make sure that they're seeing themselves in the legislature as well. It's a province where we only succeed together. If one part of the province is not successful, then the whole province is going to struggle. We need to work together as British Columbians. That was a big message during the campaign, and one that we saw in the results as well that we're going to have to do better on.
Our next question will come from Alec Lazenby from the Vancouver Sun. Go ahead, Alec.
Hi, Premier. You said this morning a fall session. You've now said a fall sitting. Can you clarify whether it will be a fall session or a fall sitting, the difference between that? And also if you've been given any clarification from Elections BC. I know there's the November 4th deadline, but when those recounts might be done.
Yeah, thanks, Alec. Yes, this morning I said fall session. In my mind, a session includes legislation and these other pieces. I meant to say fall sitting. And so the intent is to get the legislature working, to get a speaker elected so that we can get going with the new elected representatives that British Columbians have sent to Victoria. We will not be introducing, and it's not my intention to introduce legislation in the fall, but it is my intent, if we can, to have a sitting, get the speaker elected, and get the legislature working for people, as well to get a cabinet selected and sworn in so that we can start working and delivering for British Columbians right away, because I know that's what they want us to do.
And Alec, do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, it's been 9-10 days since the election. What's been the process that you've been going through over that time as you waited for all the results to be in? I know you've been talking to the Greens, the Conservatives, but in terms of what you've been doing over the past 9-10 days, can you give us some clarity on that?
Yeah, absolutely. It involved a lot of time with the refresh button on my browser. There's no question about it. It was an anxious time and a time for reflection. The good news is that I have an amazing family that I got to spend some time with. So that was one thing that Elections BC delivered for us, was a little bit more time with the Eby family. We spent some time together and unplugged a bit, which was great. And it was offset a little bit by the stress of the results, but I'm very appreciative to the residents of Surrey Guildford for sending Gary Begg back. He's going to be a key part of our team, and look forward to the conclusion of this by Elections BC so we can get to work for people.
Our next question will come from Emily Fagan from CBC News. Go ahead, Emily.
So now that you've heard the voters' feedback, with this new government, what do you intend to do differently on public safety and affordability?
Well, thanks, Emily. I think that for me, the messages around public safety, affordability, healthcare is going to involve some level of cooperation and work across the aisle if we can do it. There was a message from British Columbians that no one party had a monopoly on the best way forward, and I think it's going to be an important focus of us. Certainly, I know that addressing issues of public drug use, of people struggling with mental health issues, and severe addiction in our streets are a priority for British Columbians. I heard that loud and clear. So finding ways to accelerate that and making sure we're hearing the message from the Green Party that we don't do it at the expense of people's human rights and dignity, that's a core value that I share as well. So we'll find a path forward on these key issues. It won't be easy, but the results, I think, will be better for British Columbians on what they really care about.
And Emily, do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, thank you. Do you intend to move forward with expansions to involuntary care and removing the carbon tax if Ottawa eliminates the requirement for one, as you said during the campaign?
Yes, the commitment we made to British Columbians was we weren't going to force them to choose between a government that took climate change seriously and would take action on climate change and them being able to cover their grocery costs and cover their rent. We know that people are struggling with affordability. So yes, we will keep our commitment to British Columbians. If the federal government moves away from the backstop, we will get rid of the carbon tax. And we remain committed to addressing the struggles that people are having in our streets with mental health and addiction.
Our next question will come from Dirk Meisner from the Canadian Press. Go ahead, Dirk.
Hi. When John Rustad of the BC Conservatives says he wants to throw you guys out of office at first opportunity, how are you going to counteract that?
Well, I think that British Columbians sent us to this place to make the legislature work for them. I think that the expectation that every voter had was that we would come here and we would do our best to deliver on those priorities that they have, whether it's affordability, affordable housing, healthcare, the economy, and good paying jobs. Any of these issues, the last thing I think British Columbians want is for us to turn this place into a chance to go back to another election. This isn't a place for electioneering, this is a place for delivering for British Columbians. So I disagree fundamentally with John Rustad on that, as well as on several other critically important issues. But that doesn't mean that we can't find ways to potentially work together on the priorities of British Columbians. I'm open to that, as long as we all respect that bright line of making sure this province rejects hate and division and conspiracy and focuses on delivering for people.
And Dirk, do you have a follow-up question?
Sure. When you say work together, can we see some kind of big move by you, bringing a Green into the cabinet or possibly a Conservative speaker?
Well, my message to all MLAs is the same. If you're keen to make this place work for British Columbians on the priorities that they have, then we're keen to work with you. And we want this place to be stable. We want this place to work for British Columbians, and we're open to all kinds of discussions with MLAs about how that could work and what that would look like.
Next question from Mary Brooke, Island Social Trends. Go ahead, Mary.
Hi, Premier. Can you give us an idea of your year one strategy? Are you going to kind of proceed with NDP legislation or that you come up with, or are you going to try and attack things that were presented by the Conservatives during the campaign? In the sense of trying to reverse or collaborate in a different way?
Well, our commitments to British Columbians are clear. We're going to deliver on those election commitments that we made to them. And I think that the election result presents a significant message and opportunity for us to work with other MLAs in how we address those commitments we made to British Columbians. So I'm open to those kinds of conversations with other parties about their priorities. An example is, the Green Party has talked about moving community services closer to the front line, whether it's housing or healthcare or water management or other things like that. That's something I think we could work together. How government delivers services, make it more responsive to local communities is something I think that is a shared value we have and one we could potentially work closely on.
And Mary, do you have a follow-up question?
Yeah. One of the first issues last year that the Conservatives were able to get traction on was SOGI in the schools. And I'm just wondering if your government will want to re-examine how SOGI is delivered or just carry on the way it is.
Yeah, I think so. For us, it's a non-starter that every kid needs to be safe in school, and that's just a core value that we have. And I do think, though, what I saw out of the election was a number of people using an anti-bullying program to try to get political advantage, using misinformation. I saw it quite rampant in certain parts of the province. And so I do think there's a responsibility on us to communicate and to work with parents to address that misinformation and to make sure kids are supported in schools. And we're going to do that. It was pretty clear to me that we need to do that coming out of the election.
We have time for one more question. We'll go to Shannon Waters from Narwhal. Go ahead, Shannon.
Hi, Premier. During the leaders' debate, you said that if your government was reelected, you would not be bringing back the proposed changes to the Land Act that caused controversy earlier this year. If those are off the table, what do the next steps of implementing DRIPA look like to your government?
Well, the message we had for our First Nations partners in governance is that they remain critically important partners. And we're going to work with them on their priorities and on the priorities of British Columbians. One of the things that we saw and see really clearly in this province is where we address long-standing issues in Indigenous communities, the whole region benefits from it. And that's one of the things that I think we're going to have the opportunity to do a better job of showing over the next 4 years is when we deliver agreements, when we partner with Indigenous communities, that the whole region benefits through additional employment, economic activity, and diversity and interest in culture. There's a whole array of reasons to do this work together. And so the Land Act change, because it wasn't connected to any agreement, because it was disconnected from any specific initiative, it was open to the possibility of of creating concern, which it did. It created huge anxiety in the business community and rural communities. What does it mean? What's it going to look like for us? And so there's a lesson in that for us. And it caused backlash in a number of Indigenous communities. And so for me, I'm taking that lesson really seriously. Better communication with communities, much clearer understanding in regions about what we're doing, who we're partnering with, and how everybody's going to be included in those discussions. And I know our Indigenous partners are on side for that as well. It's hard work, but we're going to do it, and we're going to push forward because it's so important for the future of our province.
And Shannon, do you have a follow-up question?
I do. Nathan Cullen was the minister who was handling that portfolio, and he was not reelected. You're also, Murray Rankin has transitioned out of government, didn't seek reelection. Do you have any concerns about sort of the level of expertise and understanding at the cabinet level for working on this issue going forward?
We've got a remarkable cohort of MLAs who are elected. It is I think one of the, if not the most diverse and qualified groups of MLAs this province has ever seen. It includes strong Indigenous leaders, and I have no question that I've got the folks in place to make a cabinet and put a cabinet together that will be able to address not just reconciliation issues, but all of the challenges that our province faces that British Columbians sent us to address.
That's all the time we have. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Nice to see you.
You have been watching Premier David Eby speaking live from Victoria. The NDP are poised to form a majority government pending the results of a recount. And CBC News cannot declare a majority government right now based on a 27-vote margin in that riding that will go to a recount. So whether minority or majority, David Eby will remain Premier. And you heard him speaking there about receiving a message from British Columbians given the division in the vote in this election, but also saying he has been given this opportunity to create change in his approach. Taking your calls, what are your thoughts on what you heard from the Premier there? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. CBC reporter Chad Pawson is back with me now. Chad, what stood out for you?
Yeah, a couple things. I think a lot of the questions are around like, when are you going to form a cabinet and have a session? And so he clarified it would be a fall sitting. So sometime this fall, the cabinet could include, sounds like the door is open for anyone, maybe even potentially a Green Party cabinet, a minister, also who will be speaker, because this is very important. If they end up with a 47-seat majority, someone still needs to be speaker, and the speaker can vote on issues, but it's tough because they already have another job. So David Eby saying the door is open, that maybe that speaker could come from even the Conservative Party. He mentioned former BC United MLAs who have been elected under the Conservative banner as being potentials, and even the Green, one of the two Green MLAs being a potential speaker. So really interesting about when we get through these judicial recounts in the next, say, 2 weeks, week to 2 weeks, how cabinet gets formed, who becomes the speaker, and then there's MLAs go back to the legislature and begin sitting. He's saying there's not going to be any legislation this fall, but that the legislature will sit, and this composition of how you manage it. So those were a lot of the questions from reporters who are, of course, covering the legislature every single day, and they're into this nuts and bolts stuff. The bigger takeaways,
the business of it, right?
The themes here with the election, which is what we saw, is a pushback over what was seen as an overreach by David Eby and being too firm, too fast, too progressive on certain issues, not making a difference in people's lives. He seems to have gotten it. He said multiple times during this press conference that I understood what voters are saying to us. We need to do better. And also saying we need to work across party lines to come up with the solutions to affordability, healthcare, housing, those sort of things. But at the same time, I heard hatred, fight racism, no hatred, inclusive legislature said multiple times in this press conference with David Eby, basically saying these conspiracy theories that we heard during the election and this sort of language and controversy we had during the election has no place in the legislature, and that needs to disappear when they come together to sit.
Interesting that he talked about SOGI as well, that it would be, it's a core value for them, but that he heard from parents and he got a sense of a level of misinformation that's out there, and he said he would like to, I think what he said was they need to communicate more to address that misinformation. election.
Yeah, I heard him say, really interesting, that we need to do an information campaign about what SOGI really is, and that it's an anti-bullying campaign, and that this needs to be made clear to parents, because he's saying misinformation surfaced during the election that used SOGI as a political wedge. But any changes to the program's a non-starter. So yeah, really interesting. We heard the same thing also at the end of that news conference about changes proposed for BC's Land Act, which is part of our legislation to implement the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. That the way the government went about that ended up being quite divisive, and it was put on pause. And Nathan Cullen, who was the minister responsible for those changes, didn't even get elected. So David Eby also making this conciliatory tone, overtones and communication that we need to do better at collaborating. We need to do better at communicating. Something that he was criticized by being premier is moving too fast, too much out of his own office on legislation to make a difference on some of these key issues.
And during the campaign as well, when it came to his criticism of Conservative leader John Rustad as being, quite a large part of that campaign. Now, he said he has talked to Rustad. Rustad called him yesterday. Mr. Rustad called to concede the election. And David Eby said he is scheduled to speak with Sonia Furstenau this afternoon. What do you think that might look like? What are the signals as to how the Conservative leader and Premier Eby will be able to work together?
I think that is such a good question, Michelle, because we had an election that was just so polarized and got really nasty and negative the whole way, especially the last 2 weeks where Eby and the NDP essentially went after on a fear campaign saying you can't elect John Rustad to be premier of this province. It would be terrible, and instilling fear over that. So I don't know how you pull back from that. So far, what we've seen from David Eby, and even a fairly lengthy tweet from John Rustad today, we are hearing that more collaboration does need to be on the horizon. I think they'll have to have some kind of meeting where they say, okay, it was a tough campaign, it was a negative campaign, but we need to go forward, we need to solve these issues. And John Rustad saying in his tweet, we are going to form an official opposition, and we are going to work in a positive way, in a capacity in the legislature, to try and bring about change to these issues that are problems. So I think there's going to have to be a lot of work here. I think it was a very sobering campaign for David Eby, who I'm not sure at the very beginning took his adversary very seriously, and then we saw it go very negative. And now voters have said, listen, you need to do better, and he's going to have to find a way to work with John Rustad. But I think that's a tough few first conversations. And to, in that sense, speak to that urban-rural divide that he spoke about as well. He touched on really seeing that in the election results. We see it, right, in terms of the map and where you see those blues and versus the oranges. Talking about cabinet ministers potentially. So what does he need to do to be able to address and speak to all of British Columbia? Well, I mean, he needs to appoint people into his cabinet that represent rural areas of British Columbia, and he's lost some key MLAs there. Nathan Cullen being the one that really comes to mind. And then when we look at the map, you see these massive blue swaths of the province. So, I mean, is there a way that he could? He does have some candidates in more rural ridings, so I guess they would be tapped on the shoulder most likely for some kind of cabinet position. But this is where the collaboration and this is where the lines of communication need to be there to say, listen, I hear you voters. I see these areas of the province that didn't elect any NDP candidates, and maybe that is the opening for the Conservatives to have a bit more say in the business that gets done in the legislature when they finally get around to working on legislation.
We are going to speak to the mayor of Clearwater in about just over half an hour when BC Today goes into the noon hour, and hear from what a rural mayor wants to see from a new NDP government. Merlin Blackwell will be our guest coming up after the noon news. Chad, lots of calls being made today, I think. I know we're trying to reach candidates from all the parties and just to get their sense of things and how they're doing. And we're going to hear from John Rustad, Conservative leader, coming up at 2 p.m. and we'll carry that for folks as well.
Very good.
Chad, thank you so much.
You're welcome, Michelle.
Always
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you. That is Chad Pawson, CBC reporter. And of course, we will have much more coverage throughout the day here on what Premier David Eby had to say just now, again, speaking to what the business of the legislature will look like in the coming weeks. There has to be the selection of cabinet, the selection of a speaker, hoping for a fall sitting, but all of that has to wait until Elections BC finishes those recounts. Okay, and we are going to hear from some more voices as well on this as we want to hear from you. If you want to give us a call, let us know what you think of what you heard from David Eby there. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, star or pound 690 on your cell phone. And let's hear now from someone who has been involved in campaigning and the workings of an election campaign. The count in Surrey Guildford, that's the one that we are really watching. It's going to go to a judicial recount. It's a difference of 27 votes right now. If the NDP hold that riding, it will give them that majority. By just one seat, it will give them that 47 seats, the magic number for a majority government. But still plenty of uncertainties as we wait for that judicial recount. Plenty of reasons why the NDP will need the help of other parties for government to function. You heard David Eby there talking about the need to collaborate. Well, CBC spoke to John Horgan's chief of staff when the NDP signed that confidence and supply agreement with the Greens back in 2017. Now, he's now a senior advisor with the Canadian Strategy Group and a part of the Hotel Pacifico podcast. This is Jeff Meggs, and he says the NDP needs help from other parties, but perhaps won't need that CASA this time around.
The government stands or falls on the confidence of the House, and the question is, would the two Green MLAs turn down or cause another election so quickly? My view is probably not. And I think some of the circumstances that were in place last time are very different this time. So it may be that the EB team decides to simply conduct really good discussions with the Greens, but not come to a formal agreement.
But where does the speaker come from if this scenario holds?
Well, that's the next huge question, because the existing speaker, the current speaker, Raj Chauhan, has been very capable. He's respected on all sides of the House. I'm sure he would prefer to continue. And I expect that would be the case. But if they really wanted to have insurance on the NDP side, I guess they would look among the Conservatives or the Greens for a speaker. That's what happened in 2017. Darryl Plecas was an unhappy member of the BC Liberal Caucus, and he became speaker. And I would say the public grew to really like Darryl Plecas because he did a good job and actually cleaned out the clerk who was found guilty of wrongdoing with regard to a wood chipper and some other things. So Darryl did a good job for the public.
Andrew Weaver was the Green Party leader in 2017, and he said Sonia Furstenau gave up her leverage when she criticized John Rustad's leadership last week. Do you agree with that assessment?
No, I don't, because I don't, as I say, don't think she has enormous leverage in any case, like she did last time when, or like they did last time when Andrew was the leader. But Andrew Weaver's done quite a political journey from leader of the Green Party to retirement, endorsing John Horgan in 2020, and now endorsing the Conservative in Oak Bay, which is where Andrew lives. So, you know, he's really he's roamed the territory, and I'm not sure that his advice is going to carry much weight with the Green Caucus.
David Eby's been contrite in recent days, and he says he's heard the frustrations from the electorate. How might the NDP govern differently this time around?
Well, I think the Premier knows, and he made it crystal clear, I thought, on election night, that just being contrite won't cut it. You actually have to show some action. If there's a single reason that the NDP did worse than expected, it's that people generally are very frustrated with their circumstance, people who used to be often supporters of the NDP, lower income people and so on, but also in parts of the province like Surrey, very frustrated that things they would like to see happen are promised but don't happen. And I think that's going to be an important area for him to look at for action. It's very difficult and challenging in a short time to demonstrate success there, but I think that's the challenge ahead.
That was Jeff Meggs, former chief of staff to former Premier John Horgan. He was speaking with Amy Bell on CBC's On the Coast. We got an email here in reaction to the David Eby press conference, and Jacob writes from West Vancouver, I think that this NDP government, in a potential slim majority, has the potential to be a collaborative government that could lessen the division and polarization we're seeing in BC. minority, or in this case, slim majority, with the Speaker reducing the NDP seats, presumably have the potential to foster better communication and participation across party lines. My concern is that with Eby being confident in his decision to repeal the carbon tax, if the federal government does so, is an action that is strongly misaligned with science and with the urgent action we need to take in terms of the climate and ecological crisis. Science says we need to drastically reduce our carbon emissions, and Canada has some of the highest carbon emissions of any country. Income earners, it's also true that canceling the carbon tax would actually hurt low-income families the most. The carbon tax has built into it rebates for low-income earners. So what argument is there against this? Other than it opposes science. In order to work with the Greens, the BC NDP needs to realize this and better communicate this. Back to a positive note, I'm glad that Eby struck down the hate that the Conservatives perpetuated in terms of being anti-SOGI. Another aspect of the Conservatives that is anti-science and anti-truth. Jacob, thank you very much for your email. You can send us your thoughts, bctoday@cbc.ca. And on that, cross-party collaboration seems to be a theme as we go through these results and in the aftermath of the election results. David Eby did speak about that earlier this hour in that news conference. Let's listen back to what he had to say when he talked about, and he was asked about, leaning on Conservative MLAs.
Well, I have had the opportunity to work with a number of people who were elected under the Conservative banner. They worked as BC Liberals and then as BC United. I haven't had the opportunity to work with all of the people who were elected as Conservatives in the recent election, but my commitment to every MLA that was elected is, if you share our values around making sure this is a welcoming province for everyone, that we're going to fight hate and racism, these are non-negotiables for us, then we're happy to work with you to make sure that the legislature behind me works for British Columbians on those priorities that we all share. And so it's an open invitation to any MLA to work with us. There are a number of ways that MLAs could work with us to deliver for British Columbians. One of those ways is certainly Speaker. I know we've got some great candidates on our bench. I'm sure the Greens would be able to put forward a good Speaker, maybe the Conservatives. We're not ruling anything out.
That's David Eby speaking earlier this hour. Well, several First Nations leaders in this province are raising concerns about the leadership of the BC Conservative Party. Now, this comes after two of the party's candidates made public comments about Indigenous people, deemed disparaging and even racist. Those candidates are Dallas Brody, who ran and won in the riding of Vancouver-Kilchena, and recently, the BC Conservative candidate for the riding of Wondifuka-Malahat, Marina Sopish-Nokov, who is projected to lose her race narrowly. The early edition heard today from Judith Sayers. She's the president of the Nuu-chah-nulth Tribal Council. She spoke to Stephen Quinn.
Over the past couple of days, some comments made by candidates have been repeated in media interviews and stories. As journalists like me report on reaction to the comments, what kind of impact does that have on Indigenous people listening to, hearing those words over and over again? I've tried to avoid repeating them, but I feel like people need to hear what's being said.
Yeah, I agree with you, Stephen. I think people need to know that people who are considered leaders in their community are saying such things. And yeah, I mean, it hurts. It flings us back to early 1700, 1800, when the first white man arrived and didn't understand that we were a very spiritual, organized government, and they called us savages, and that's just so wrong and so out of place. And so, and one of the candidates is a doctor, and I'm hoping that medical college will reviewing her ethics as well, because if this is how she feels about Indigenous people and she's serving them because Pachi Dot is in her riding. And so, I just can't believe in this day and age we're hearing public comments during a very public election, such words.
And Conservative leader John Rustad has issued a statement saying that the comments, the latest comments that you've just been talking about, are appalling. We have not so far heard of any, discipline coming to the member who said them. The CBC spoke with Grand Chief Stuart Phillip of the Union of BC Indian Chiefs and Terry Teegee as well, the regional chief of the BC Assembly of First Nations. They both said that, a lack of concrete action represents a failure of leadership on Rustad's part. What do you say?
I think the same. Rustad should have come out immediately and condemned her, asked her to leave the party when I know there's some timelines associated with that. Well, both candidates had said these things and took immediate action. I mean, saying these things, yeah, I mean, anybody can say those things, but actually taking action and, demanding that they apologize, that they take some sort of positive action to repair the damage they've done. The BC government passed an anti-racism act in the spring, and if they became elected, they would have to live up to that and put an action plan in place. And so that's what, we're worried about is, people like that in positions of authority, are they going to repeal the Anti-Racism Act too? You just don't know.
Well, Grand Chief Stuart Phillip also told CBC in an interview this week that by allowing that, that kind of anti-Indigenous rhetoric that we're hearing in politics, in our political system, that and this is a quote from him, we are sleepwalking into political extremism. What do you think about the kind of rhetoric that we have seen come to the fore in this election?
Well, I just think it's very repugnant and it's very unnecessary. If you can't support First Nations, where we're heading, asking to repeal the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People Act, which is human rights legislation, is so uncalled for and without putting anything in place. Like, we have worked for years with the NDP on different acts and changes to policy. And what was their plan? Just to, push us back into the background again? So, these sorts of things should never happen.
Well, I think the policy, according to John Rustad, was to try to make Indigenous people partners in some of the projects, on some of the infrastructure projects undertaken by the province. I think that was his line. What did you think of that?
Well, that's nothing. I mean, by law, consultation, accommodation, free, prior, and informed consent, those sorts of things are already required. He's giving us nothing. And, a lot of those projects are ones that First Nations are opposed to, and they should not be forced into, those projects just because they'll give a few jobs and, I don't know, maybe some revenue sharing, but I don't know where he stands on that either.
Judith, I don't want to make an unwelcome comparison here, but I'm an analogy, I guess, which is in when we have difficult economic times, we see issues like climate change, for instance, get pushed to the back burner, right? We can't afford that right now. That's kind of what. Do you think people do the same with the actions of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission? That it's somehow, times are too hard. Everybody's too worried about putting food on the table to worry about that now.
I think that there are a lot of people who believe reconciliation is not called for. It is. I mean, it's at the forefront of everything that happens in the fabric of the society in British Columbia. And it has to be taken seriously. It has to be enforced at all levels of government and in all corporations and educational institutes. This is a widespread effort that we're making to make things right after all the wrongs that have been done. And, as we're still living with the impacts of colonization in our communities, helping us to deal with that as well. The New Channel have called the state of emergency over mental health and opioid crisis. That sort of stuff needs support.
That was Judith Sayers, the president of the Nuu-chah-nulth Tribal Council. She spoke to the CBC's Stephen Quinn. Now, this past hour, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau issued a statement on the results of the BC election. And he stated, and this has been sent to us, on behalf of the Government of Canada, I congratulate David Eby and the BC New Democratic Party on their re-election. For the first time in the province, women will hold the majority of seats in the legislature. I look forward to continuing to work with Premier Eby to deliver on the issues that matter the most to British Columbians and all Canadians, whether it's building more homes, improving access to health care, advancing reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, growing our economies, or creating good middle-class jobs. We will remain focused on building stronger communities and a more prosperous province for all. That is a statement from the Prime Minister on the results of the provincial election in BC. And as you just heard, for the first time in BC's history, there will be more women MLAs than men. Mary Polak is a former member of the legislature and BC Liberal cabinet minister. She spoke to CBC's Amy Bell on the Coast.
What goes through your mind when you hear that the majority of people elected to the legislature are women?
It's so encouraging. It's been a long, long path to get here. Part of it is trying to recruit more women to run, and part of it is trying to get voters to support them when you nominate them. That's been a challenge. If you look back on previous elections, there have been elections where we had large numbers of women who were nominated by parties and weren't able to achieve success in the general election. So it's encouraging that voters are doing that. It's encouraging that the efforts that started years and years ago have actually made a difference in recruitment. A really good example of that is the changes that Gordon Campbell spearheaded years back to ensure that there was a set election date, to set the calendar for the legislature ahead of time. People forget that, in days gone by, the legislature could be called virtually at any time, and it was. And there were long night sittings, things that made it much more impractical for somebody with a family. And we're still at that place where women are largely caregivers in their families. It really discouraged them from running. So, those were some of the changes that began this process.
Right.
And I'm glad to see it's finally coming to fruition.
And you were first elected in 2005. How do you feel, that the attitudes towards women in power have changed since you were first elected, or have they changed?
Oh, I think they've changed significantly. They've been changing in the civil service for a long time, but of course that, doesn't rely on people voting for them in election. I think you're seeing now that people are less likely to evaluate whether a candidate is a man or a woman and simply ask themselves, are they a good candidate? And that's a real positive thing. We've certainly seen that in the legislative chamber, that women are far more likely to dive into those raucous debates than just leaving it with the men. And, women come in all shapes and sizes and thoughts and views as well. I know some of my female colleagues were never all that pleased about the adversarial nature of the legislature. I, for one, always loved it. That was what attracted me to it in the first place. So, men aren't all the same, women aren't all the same, and to see that increased diversity in terms of having women in the legislature is a long time coming, and I think it's going to be beneficial.
Well, and you can speak to this, why it is so important to have women in elected positions.
Well, they're half of our population, so
there's that.
You do want to have representation. Ideally, in any government that's democratic, you want to see the people in government reflecting the diversity that is there in your general society, right? So anytime you can see that happening more in the legislature is a good thing. I don't come from the school that says that somehow men are intrinsically better at it or women are. People are people, whatever their gender might be. But I do think just the fact that you're seeing a reflection of the population better mirrored in your legislature is always a good thing.
But how does a large number of women in the legislature, affect policy?
I don't know if it affects the issues directly. In my experience, women are just as concerned about the economy as men are, and men are just as concerned about childcare as women are, if you want to take the sort of stereotypical issues. I do think that, when you have, again, that reflection in the government and in the legislature broadly of what our society looks like, you're going to naturally achieve a better set of regulations and laws that you're putting forward for people because you've got better representation from the public.
Right.
But I don't know that it has a specific female impact on the legislature.
If we're looking ahead to another NDP majority, what's top of mind for you?
Well, it's going to be how they balance the need to deal with a ballooning deficit and at the same time respond to the promises and commitments that they've made during the election campaign. That's going to be very challenging, and I'm sure that's going to provide a lot of fodder for the opposition as well.
You represented Langley for 15 years, and the Conservatives swept Langley in this election, and most seats south of the Fraser. What message did voters send the NDP?
Well, I think the Conservatives, in spite of a whole lot of headwinds, some of them self-made, they've successfully framed the ballot question. That's always what elections are about, right? Those of us who aren't right in the center of it, and I wasn't this time, but for most ordinary people, they're going to that ballot box, and it's the job of the political campaign to make sure that the question in their mind when they vote is the one that that party wants them to be asking. And in this case, the opposition, this being the BC Conservatives, I think successfully framed the ballot question around, do you feel like things are better or are things kind of broken and not working? And I think that as a theme succeeded for them. And I think the NDP, unfortunately, fell into the same trap that I believe we BC Liberals did in 2017, which was not really providing a clear reason why their government deserved to be reelected, and instead fell, as again I say, into a trap of just pointing to the other guys and saying, well, don't go for them because they're worse than us.
Right.
They're bad. Don't vote for those guys. It never works. It never works. And of course, we've seen that the NDP losing a substantial number of seats and in areas where I don't think they expected to.
What do you think is going to be the biggest challenges for the NDP going forward?
Well, if you want to talk about governance, it's going to be caucus discipline, and that's going to be the same for the opposition and government. But of course, there's more at stake for government if they lose a vote in the House. But in terms of governance, you've got an awful lot of very thorny problems. And unless you're planning to go into deeper and deeper deficit, you are going to have a hard time solving them. And of course, remember that, to the extent your deficit grows, lending agencies are less happy about loaning you money and they charge you a lot more interest. And when you're talking about deficits, in the $9 billion range, I think this past year, those interest levels can grow pretty high. You think about your own growing credit card bill and what the interest payments start to look like on that when it ramps up in dollars. It can be pretty significant on government.
Yeah, it's not pretty. Mary, I can't let you go if we're talking about women in politics without turning an eye down to across the border and obviously VP Kamala Harris and on the precipice of perhaps winning the presidential race. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think it's always been possible in the U.S. It kind of goes back to my original comment that, when it comes to women being in elected office, it's a combination of things, right? It's not just about them being nominated by their party, but it's also about the voters accepting them.
Yeah.
I think we're at a place now where people are less likely to vote based on gender and more likely to vote based on the issues that are important to them. And I hope that's what'll happen in the U.S. And other than that, I'm not going to dive into that mess.
We don't have time for that, Mary. Thank you so much for taking time with us today.
You're very welcome.
Mary Polak is a former BC Liberal MLA and cabinet minister. We've been taking your reaction to the BC election and to what you heard from Premier David Eby, who spoke earlier in this hour. And one of the points he made was he learned from the results of the election about that urban-rural divide in terms of the votes and the party lines when it comes to how British Columbia voters are feeling. Well, we have an email here from Helga writing us from Egan Lake in the South Caribou. Helga writes, I'm happy with the return of the NDP to government. I'm again dismayed with the lack of representation in the northern half of the province where I live. We retired in the Caribou area on a lake and have encountered problems with health services as well as basic maintenance of our roads. Roads are currently being maintained or not by a private contractor whose company has not always been responsive to our needs as rural residents. We had an entire week in 2022 when the road was not plowed and no one could get in and out. Our gravel road is full of potholes and maintenance is sporadic at best. With respect to healthcare up here, my husband and I have both had health emergencies, but fortunately we were able to receive emergency attention and treatment. I think the idea of having community clinics for minor issues would be great. The clinics could be staffed by nurses who would do routine screening, particularly for seniors, and to treat minor complaints. Wildfires, also an ongoing concern up here. The government needs to be proactive in preventative actions like clearing of the forest floor and preventative burns. Most people who live on properties adjacent to the forest up here do not have the resources to do this themselves. Addressing those above issues should improve the position of the NDP as a governing party in the north. We have been taking your emails on the BC election, and Pilinka wrote us from Lee Creek. I voted with my heart this year because I'm sick of choosing the lesser of 2 or 3 evils. In the past, I have voted NDP, but this year I decided to vote with my heart and vote Green. I really wonder what the outcome would be if everyone voted with their hearts instead of their heads. And there are statistics that show evidence of how this would affect the outcomes of our elections. And Trudy writes from Maple Ridge, where Conservative candidate Lawrence Mock has been elected. I live and vote in Maple Ridge West, and even if a Green candidate had run in my riding, I would have felt forced to strategically vote for the NDP in order not to give an additional seat to the Conservatives. And Cher writes from Victoria, in light of how close this election is and the extreme behaviors witnessed in the campaign, it seems a perfect time to provide your listeners with more detailed information on proportional representation. One can imagine that this next 4 years is going to be extremely polarized in the legislature. I'd love to learn, would elected representatives be required to work more consensually under a proportional representation system than first past the post? If so, is it fair to assume first past the post encourages more polarity with less accomplished legislatively in such a close election outcome? And in light of the increasingly loathing rhetoric we are seeing in the U.S. election, in this BC election, and in Canadian Parliament federally, might an election campaign under PR be more civil? Thank you so much for all of your emails. bctoday@cbc.ca. And do stay with us. BC Today continues in a couple of minutes. Your latest CBC News headlines are next here on CBC News BC. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. David Eby will remain Premier of BC. And he says British Columbians have sent the NDP a message that they want change, but have also given them another opportunity. What do you want the NDP and the Premier David Eby to do differently? How do you want them to stay the course? After 12:30, the legend of Slumox Gold. We'll talk to the authors who tell the story of the mysterious Pit Lake gold mine and ask you, ahead of Halloween, what are the local legends and lore that you have grown up with? I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. The BC NDP are forming government after a tight election race that was too close to call until yesterday. Pending judicial recounts, the NDP has been elected in 47 ridings, the Conservatives in 44, and the BC Greens in 2. Means that the BC NDP are on the path to form a majority government. BC Premier David Eby spoke in the last hour, and he said that he heard the message loud and clear from the election results and spoke about cross-party collaboration. Let's listen to what he said when asked about leaning on Conservative MLAs.
Well, I have had the opportunity to work with a number of people who were elected under the Conservative banner. They worked as BC Liberals and then as BC United. I haven't had the opportunity to work with all of the people who were elected as Conservatives in the recent election, but my commitment to every MLA that was elected is if you share our values around making sure this is a welcoming province for everyone, that we're going to fight hate and racism, these are non-negotiables for us, then we're happy to work with you to make sure that the legislature behind me works for British Columbians on those priorities that we all share. And so it's an open invitation to any MLA to work with us. There are a number of ways that MLAs could work with us to deliver for British Columbians. One of those ways is certainly Speaker. I know we've got some great candidates on our bench. I'm sure the Greens would be able to put forward a good Speaker, maybe the Conservatives. We're not ruling anything out.
Well, we're asking you, what do you want the NDP government to do differently? How do you want them to stay the course, on the other hand? Call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. And by email, you can reach us, bctoday@cbc.ca. In a moment, we're going to hear from the mayor of Clearwater on what he would like to see from an NDP government. Right now, let's take a call from Tim in Nanaimo. Hi, Tim. Welcome.
Oh, hello.
You're up. Yes. What a short wait this time, right?
So much trouble getting through. I get the first one this time. Yeah, thank you. I guess one thing NDP could do better is communicate better, but more to the polarization and bridging the gap is really kind of the wrong question. It's more about more democracy and having better democratic representation.
What do you mean by that?
Huh?
What do you mean by that, more democratic representation?
Well, because parties don't seem to serve the public interest in its entirety. I mean, despite David Eby's good words, he has a lack of success that has dogged him through the election. And progress, I think, could be better and faster if more of the legislature was independent and free. So I think it's important to serve the public interest that we have more independent representation, which Green Party doesn't whip their members' votes, so they're basically independent agents.
And Tim, you're in Nanaimo. I know healthcare is a really big issue there. There were promises around the hospital and new facilities there. What do you want to see improve?
Well, certainly funding would help, but it's not the be-all and end-all. Better organization would be better. I don't know exactly how the healthcare system operates. I don't work in that field.
Sure. Fair.
Certainly, I think the systems ought to work better. I understand that they're kind of not organized to work together. They're siloed, so that's a problem. It's all the way we designed it. It is designed not to work very well, and we just need to get down to the brass tacks about how things really could work better and should work better, and find the right people to create the organization. But that can't be done when parties are, or when the one party that has the power is controlling what happens.
More
for political interest and not for the public interest.
Yeah, and talking about MLAs representing their constituents as well, rather than towing the party line.
They have freedom to speak and to act for the public interest.
Okay. Tim, thank you very much for your call. That's Tim in Nanaimo, getting us off to a head start here. Right now I am joined by Merlin Blackwell, who's mayor of Clearwater. Good afternoon, Mayor. Thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me back.
Well, what's your response and your reaction to the election results?
It's pretty much what I expected. I figured it would be a small majority either way, or minority governments, but definitely split along rural and urban lines for sure.
You're right. If you look at the map, you see the division of the colors, right? The blue in the north, and as you head further east, some orange spots there in the east, but certainly you see orange further in the south and the coast. Premier Eby talked about that urban-rural divide in his press conference. You know, what would it take for an NDP government to address the needs of Clearwater?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that we need. It's similar with a lot of rural towns. You know, foremost for a lot of the interior is resolving the issues around healthcare and keeping our emergency rooms open. Public safety issues like policing, highway patrol, that's pretty widespread across rural BC as well. Things like intercity buses. And forestry reform is another huge item that we need some work with here as communities that have lost their mills but are surrounded by burnt timber that should be salvaged.
On forestry reform, do you feel you heard enough on that during the election?
No, I definitely didn't. Certain candidates for sure, but you know, when you talk about depth in cabinet, the BC NDP is going to really struggle with rural issues like forestry, like mining, where they're going to need to find and come out into our communities and talk to people out here and get that expertise from people, or, you know, as suggested, go across the floor and ask those MLAs that were elected in those ridings, what exactly do they need to keep the local economies going in rural BC?
How do you see that moving forward? It seems that the NDP, that David Eby has now, seems to be acknowledging the issues that have been raised by the Conservatives when it comes to affordability and when it comes to public safety. Do you see, I suppose, more of an acknowledgement or a ceding to what the needs are of forest-reliant communities that have been affected as the decline in that industry continues, and as the government tries to move forward and be more ecologically sensitive?
Yeah, I think some of it is there. I think the seeds are there. I think that the BC NDP needs to come out and talk to us. I mean, that used to be the case. Thinking back under Premier Horgan's rule, I saw Rolly Russell, I saw Nathan Cullen. You know, I talked to Josie Osborne on a fairly regular basis back in those days. And, you know, I still get to talk to people like Bowen Ma when it comes to emergency management. But, you know, they need to come out into our communities and have that conversation and understand what's going on for us. Because seeing it on the ground, housing issues, the need for infrastructure, roads, water, sewer, all those basics that we really struggle with. If you want to bridge that gap over the next 4 years, you need to do it either through your opposition elected MLAs or come out into rural and actually talk to the communities. And I would highly encourage the NDP cabinet to start meeting with the rural district, regional district directors at their meetings, because that's probably the easiest way to get into that door and into the room to talk to us.
How soon would you like that to happen?
You know, if Premier Eby is going to hit the road on the legislature right away, then start it right away. We're going through budget process right now. We have 2 years left in our terms here as elected local leaders. I think there's a lot that could get done in the next couple of years. And with some of these issues, especially around forestry reform and emergency management, we need it now. I mean, yesterday it was too late, really. So, you know, come out and talk to us. We have 4 years to work together and get things done. And, you know, there's so many issues that we need to deal with. Indigenous relations, so many different things that you really do need to have that rural lens on. And, you know, as somebody who grew up in Vancouver for the first 25 years of my life and then spent summers in the interior, I fully understand that rural-urban divide. And I understand the perspective that people are coming from. But I think the BC NDP needs to not fear us, and it needs to come out and talk to us on these things.
Mayor Blackwell, really good to speak with you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Merlin Blackwell is mayor of Clearwater, saying there that the NDP government needs to really address the needs of rural communities and meet with representatives from there. It is 12:16. This is BC Today. We have been taking your emails on the BC election as well, and we got this email from Jagger, who wrote to make the case for lowering the voting age. And he writes, every election in Canada, we also hold unofficial student votes where youth under the voting age get to vote in a mock election. Obviously, the media hasn't talked all that much about the student vote results since they don't actually count towards the results. But I think this year's student vote tells a very important story. The student vote results were as follows: NDP with 43 seats, the BC Conservatives 40 seats, and the Green Party with 10 seats. I think this really shows that young people are capable of voting and participating in our democracy. The fact we had large numbers voting for all major parties shows that people under 18 are able to understand that both the NDP has largely failed on issues important to them, but also that the Conservatives have had a lot of bad policies that would hurt young people in the long term. The same thing is true for people over 18, but in that case, they have swung even more against the NDP and toward the Conservatives. I find it so tiring when young people massively supported left-wing parties, the right dismissed us as naive, and now that young people are voting much more diversely, and we've shown a willingness to massively swing our votes, many on the left are dismissing us. Instead of trying to understand why we are voting the way we are, they try to dismiss us and prevent us from voting. As a young person who has both run for office and been actively participating in some form since I was 10, we are ready to lead. Give us a voice. Young people are capable of voting, including many under 16, and it benefits everyone to extend the right to vote. Jagger, thank you very much. BC Today at cbc.ca. We are asking you, what do you think the NDP government should do differently? And we heard from NDP leader Premier David Eby in the last hour as he held a press conference saying he's received the message from British Columbians that voters wanted change. At the same time, they've given the NDP another opportunity. So we'd like to ask you, what do you want to see different when it comes to the NDP? And how do you want them to stay the course? 1-800-825-5950. 604-669-3733. And Suki is on the line in Vancouver. Hi, Suki.
Hi, Michelle. And I'm just saying this, giving my 2 cents, and just want to tell people I am an NDP supporter. I actively supported a candidate who became an MLA in this election. But to me, I just felt with the NDP overall, there has been a sense of complacency with some of the issues that are affecting British Columbians.
Which issues?
With housing specifically, and crime. I've already mentioned before in the past about my experience with crime, and I just feel that the NDP has been a little too slow to react at times. And when you make lots of announcements 6 to 8 months before an election, it doesn't really give the best optics to British Columbians, because they feel that a lot of these new measures, things that are being done because of an election, as opposed to what's best for British Columbians. Another example, I think, is in regards to the failure of the tree cooperative, the BC Tree Cooperative in
the tree fruit.
Okanagan. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the tree fruits cooperative. And I remember when that happened a few months ago, and a lot of people were asking for Pam Alexis to actually come in person to the Okanagan and to meet up affected farmers.
The agricultural minister at the time, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think it's so important if you are, especially a minister, and that is your specific portfolio, sometimes it's so important to meet people in person to show that you are there, that you are seen, as opposed to perhaps doing all the... I understand there's a lot of back work done, which we don't see, but sometimes it's important to be seen in the community and seeing that you are there and you are concerned about what's happened and you are trying your best to try and basically mitigate whatever has happened. And I think that could be part of the reason why Pam Alexis lost her seat, because obviously Abbotsford Mission, there is a lot of farming, there are a lot of farming communities out there. Mm-hmm. And that that just shows an example to me of complacency.
You know, it's interesting, Suki, pardon me, sorry to jump in, but you just reminds me of what we heard from the mayor of Clearwater, saying we want that visit, we want the call, but yes, we would love for you to reach out and come to us and see what we do experience when it comes to, he was talking about forestry and emergency management, the impact of things like wildfires. But that's a good point you make in terms of doing the outreach and what a difference going in person would make, especially if the divide is as geographic as the map is showing it to be. Thank you so much for the call, Suki. Good to hear from you again.
Thank you.
Robert is on the line now. Let's go to one of those communities in Abbotsford. Hi, Robert.
Hello.
Hi, thanks for calling. What do you want to see different?
Well, first of all, congratulations to the EB and the NDP for eking out a very small majority. But what concerns me is I heard that they were talking about reconvening the legislature in February and then they need to get on with the business now. Mr. Eby should be forming his cabinet pronto.
He's hoping for that, yes.
Right after all the election stuff is settled, the final counts are done. And they should be back in business in 2 weeks. Get his cabinet informed, get ready. Come on, guys. Got to get going here. I'm a retired school teacher. Imagine if kids showed up on the first day of school and we said, okay, come on back in about 2 or 3 weeks. We're going to have things organized for you. No. Maybe, they've been in the legislature. They've been out. They've had elections. They've won it. All right, it's over with. Now let's get back to business because people have issues and they need to get those issues solved.
Those many issues that need to be addressed.
Many issues.
Thank you very much for the call. He did say in the last hour he is hoping for a fall sitting. No legislation, though, that would be passed, but he's hoping for November or December, and it is all pending the work of Elections BC. Robert, thank you very much. People wanting to get work done in the legislature, get things going again. Trace is on the line now in Vancouver. What would you like to see the NDP government do differently, Trace?
Again, congrats to the NDP and the two Greens. Just as an aside, I do think we should get rid of the first past the post system we have. My interest is green transportation. I think we have to work towards better transportation in Metro Vancouver, Fraser Valley, and throughout BC. I was appalled when the Conservatives proposed a 6 to 8 lane expansion of Highway 1 out to the Fraser Valley. I think we need better public transit in the Fraser Valley and encourage active transportation too.
Trace?
I hope the NDP doesn't cave to public pressure for bigger highways because I don't think it's the direction to go.
Okay, great to hear from you, Trace. Thank you. Bob is next now in Port Coquitlam as we ask you what you would like to see the NDP do differently. Hi, Bob.
Yes, a bit disappointed that the Greens won't be relied on so much as I hoped. But I think the NDP still will need the Greens to get through these next 4 years. So I'm hoping that they will, because they're relying on the Greens, they will do more about the climate crisis because there wasn't much talk at all about it. And the only reason the Conservatives, I think, would do anything again because they rely on the Greens. So apart from everything else, economics and all the prices going up and problems with transportation and so forth and so on, we don't do anything about the climate crisis. It's not going to make much difference. We've got to work. That's the most important crisis we've got to face today. So let's hope the NDP will rely on the Greens to get through the next 4 years and do much more to make this environment a better place for our children and grandchildren and do something for the world, for every living creature in the world.
Bob,
if we don't, we got major problems.
Can I ask you, you're right, we didn't hear as much about the climate crisis in this election. We did hear that the NDP promised to revoke the consumer carbon tax should the federal government remove the requirement for it. What do you make of that?
Well, it's like what the major conservatives, federal government conservatives are saying, is what Trump is pushing. I mean, they got to face the facts of what the scientists are saying. Pretty well every scientist that knows it was working with the environment says we've got to do something. If we don't, we're going to have more wildfires, more floods, we're going to have more species lost, and the world is going to need to have no one living here at all. Eliminate everyone, because then the world, the climate, the climate will recover, the world will come back to a beautiful place it was, a paradise. And so we are damaging it terribly, and if they still try to do everything to fight against what we can do for the climate, including the carbon tax, we've got to do everything we can, because it's vital, especially for if they say they love their children and grandchildren, don't just show videos of them playing them like Polly F does
Bob,
with them. Do something to help them.
Thank you very much for the call. That's Bob in Port Coquitlam saying don't turn your eyes away from the climate issue. We have some emails here now as well, and this is an interesting one from Gail, who writes, on the other hand, get rid of the carbon tax and inflation will go down. Thank you, Gail, for that. Scott writes a couple of key ideas for the BC NDP to consider. One is its Scope 3 emissions accountability, require every project to account for those emissions, with emissions being taxed at the source to cover full supply chain impacts, and proportional representation. Lisa writes, they need to give a significant rebate for rental units for seniors with under $50,000 or even $40,000 yearly income, or allow more to be claimed on income tax than last year. Avis writes, revamp the NDP forest policy. Canfor has been shutting down their mills and operations because there's little in the way of cuttable trees left. Leave the old growth forests alone. Thank you very much for your emails. We are at bctoday@cbc.ca. And we are going to be back in our next half hour here talking about Halloween this time, but of course much more coverage to come throughout the day here on CBC. We will be covering more on the election, of course, and Conservative leader John Rustad is scheduled to speak coming up at 2 o'clock. I'll be back this afternoon to present that and host that along with my friend Dan Burritt. So that's coming up in about an hour and a half from now. Do stay tuned online. We'll carry that for you on our streaming channel, CBC News BC, as well as on YouTube, and much more coverage, of course, this afternoon on your afternoon shows and on CBC News at 6. This is BC Today. We are live on CBC Radio 1, CBC Television, live streaming as well. You can find us on YouTube at CBC British Columbia, or use the CBC News app. And coming up, we have a fascinating book to tell you about. It's about the legend of Slumax Gold in Pitt Lake. We're going to hear from two of the authors and ask you as well on the open line, what are the local stories, the legends and lore that you've grown up with as well? I have many from growing up in the Philippines, but you tell us your stories. We have some books to give away. That's all coming up after the CBC News Update with Robert Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. Messages of congratulations are coming in as final voting in the provincial election shows an NDP majority. Grand Chief Stuart Phillips says the victory marks an important step toward deep reconciliation. BC Federation of Labour President Suzanne Skidmore says BC voters have given the NDP a renewed mandate for progressive change. The NDP is in a majority position, but there will be judicial recounts in 2 ridings. Travelers are being warned of a possible exposure to measles on flights to and from Vancouver International. A passenger with measles arrived at the airport October 16th and left on another flight that evening. And police on Vancouver Island have seized more than 120,000 packages of cannabis-laced edibles with wrappers mimicking recognizable treats. The RCMP shared photos showing illicit cannabis snacks with names such as Reefers for cannabis-infused peanut butter cups in packaging similar to Reese's Pieces, as well as Kush Cat chocolates in a red wrapper like a Kit Kat. And now the BC forecast on the north coast. Rain this afternoon with strong winds and a high of 9. Highs around 4 with increasing cloudiness in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, mainly sunny with a high of 5. Highs from 6 to 9 degrees with lots of sunshine in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, a mix of sun and cloud with a high of 10. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, mainly cloudy this afternoon with highs around 11 degrees. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Thank you so much, Rob.
You're welcome.
Rob Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. I don't know if Rob went to BCIT, but I do have the former head of the journalism program at BCIT here with me. We're about to have a chat. I just want to go through some of our emails on the election. And we have an email from Josh who writes, I'm happy with the result of the election, though I would have been happier with a wider margin between the NDP plus Green numbers and the Conservatives for more stability. I'd like the NDP to be more aggressive with healthcare, opening publicly run clinics where the doctors are employees rather than business owners. I'd like to see them be more aggressive on housing with a firmer commitment to non-market supply and disincentives for speculation. On the topic of polarization, I think North America in general is suffering from a crisis of values. Thank you for your email. And we have another one from Dwight in Coquitlam. The NDP must do better for BC's search and rescue community. 78 teams in the province with 3,400 unpaid professionals, and they put in hundreds of thousands of hours. However, they've been treated, EMCR has treated these dedicated people disrespectfully over the last couple of years. Thank you very much for your email as well, Dwight. And Lisa writes they need to give a significant rebate for rental units. And much more of your comments coming in that I can see here. Janice writes, get a new health minister. Don't just keep supporting developers for truly cost housing such as co-ops and approvals for LNG projects. That's from Janice in Port Alberni. Thanks for your emails. BC Today at cbc.ca. It is Halloween week, and that often brings out those gather around the campfire, give you the shivers kind of stories. You know, we're going to speak to the authors of Slumax Gold in Search of a Legend and a Curse. We're going to hear more about that story as well. And we have 2 copies of the book to give away to 2 lucky callers. I've got 1 copy right here. And you can let us know, what are the stories and legends and lore that you grew up with? You can give us a call now, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can also hit pound 690 on your phone or send us an email, bctoday@cbc.ca. And I have 2 guests with me. Joining me in studio is Brian Antonson. Hello.
Hello.
Nice.
Glad to be here.
Very glad to see you. And Rick Antonson joins us on Zoom. Hello to you.
Thank you very much for having us a part of this.
Oh, I am fascinated by this, and I just wanted to note as well, BCIT grad over here, and Brian, former head of the journalism school at BCIT. It's nice to see you again.
It's nice to be here. I think the last time we saw each other was a quarter century ago.
Shall we really
nice
go through that? I remember sitting in that class, you know, the first day of my career at BCIT, just being incredibly intimidated. And I think you spoke about just how lucky we were to be doing this kind of work, or to be able to learn to do this kind of work.
Do you agree now? All these years later?
It's going okay. It's going okay. I get to have these chats with you and our callers, which is fantastic. Tell me about Slumax Gold. First of all, perhaps tell us about Slumac.
Slumac was a real guy, full of legendary backgrounds and so on, but he was a real guy. who murdered somebody in 1890 and was hanged for that in 1891. And sometime after that, probably within 6 years, and we don't have much information about that time, came a rumor that he had gold. And so ever since the late 1800s into the 1900s, fact and fiction have mingled and been mixed up, and it's been a real incredible thing. We found out about this when we were kids around a campfire and said, we're going to go find the gold when we grow up. And of course, as we got older, we realized that was unlikely. So we started writing books about it with our colleague, Mary Traynor, and that's how we come to be with this capstone edition, I think we're calling it. It's a brilliant book, 8 by 10 in size, 224 pages, color photographs,
Lots of
and maps.
archival photos
you
too.
bet, all sorts of information.
And Rick, Brian just said that you actually started writing about this, years ago, but you've wanted to revisit it, and part of it is because of the indigenous part of this story as well.
Well, on two fronts. One, Mary, Brian, and I began in 1972 with the research into this and did the first book to be written about Slumac. We thought then we compiled pretty thorough research and information and put to rest much of the legend.
With 56
and the reality
pages.
of the curse or not. Then in 2007, we did a much expanded update book, which we thought again would put to rest the legend with all the facts that we had determined. But in both instances, it simply sparked more people being interested in looking for Slumac's lost gold mine. So this edition brings much of it together. We're more thorough on the indigenous peoples of the time where Slumac would have been living, how that would have been for a then 80-year-old man convicted of murder, rushed through the trial and hung. And did he or did he not put a curse on gold mines in the area that if anyone went to find it, they were supposed to die?
Tell us about this curse. So part of it, you said you started to look for the gold, and you said, well, we decided to just write the book. But I wonder if that was also because, oh my goodness, there's a curse attached to this.
One of the very early things that we found out was that there was no curse. And that's a huge disappointment to people. We put that into the title because it is such a part of it. But Slumac went to his death without saying anything. So the witnesses who were there, reporters and whatnot, said that he walked up the steps to the gallows, was silent, and then they put the noose around his neck and it was all over. Did not utter the gallows curse, which legend has said is Nika Memlus, mine Memlus, which means when I die, mine dies. And any time that somebody's died, and it's pretty rough country up there, so any time that somebody has died or disappeared, people say automatically, oh, well, it's the curse again. Thus, the legend has grown.
And people have gone to look for it, right?
Oh, thousands.
Yeah.
Thousands and thousands, yeah.
And continue looking to this
Today,
day. There have been television series and podcasts,
yes.
other books, many writings, but people are captivated by this. The Slumac's gold today is one of North America's most famous lost treasures. It's up there with the Oak Island Money Pit or Dutchman's Lost Mine in the US or Montezuma's. It's one of those sort of just iconic searches that people want to undertake because there just might be more truth than others realize, and there may be gold in the Pit Lake area.
That's the way to tease it out. Well done, Rick. And yes, I'm going to ask you about, was it Wings Over Canada? I think was
That was one of the shows.
One of the
many
shows that
yes.
went. I think that was, I was fascinated by that as well. And the inn with a map on the wall. And okay, let's go through that in a bit. We do have a story now from Keith in Vancouver. You have a story to tell that you grew up with, Keith?
Yeah, it's a really short story, but there's a folklorist in Nova Scotia by the name of Helen Creighton who's since passed away, and she wrote a book called, Blue Nose Ghosts. And when I was a kid, I was told that my great grandmother had a story in the book, and of course, when you're 12 years old, kind of thing, you're like, really, come on. But basically, yeah, she had a story. It's very, very short. Basically, they're walking up the road one night, and they saw the whole house lit up, and they were kind of surprised because they didn't think anybody was home. They made a turn on the road again, and the whole house was dark. So, at the time, of course, that's a forerunner of death. And yeah, it's just I don't know if anyone passed away shortly after, but yeah, it's kind of neat to see who I was lucky enough to know my great grandmother. She's a woman of the 90s, the 1890s.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's kind of interesting. And then of course, it's already been mentioned, but Oak Island. I always chuckle about that. My dad loves the show, and it's every week. Wait, there's more. There's more. And it's like, you've got Billy on there. His answer to everything is just dig more because he's the backhoe operator, right? What do we do, Billy? Just dig, just dig.
Oh my gosh, Keith, why do you think we're so fascinated with these stories?
Well, I don't know. It's just there's always the possibility. It's kind of like you're literally hunting. You might find it, you might not, and it's also probably a fair bit of camaraderie. For on the gold side, getting out there and just in the woods, and you're away from everything, and there's always that possibility. I mean, I think on the radio, CBC last week or so, I think it was As It Happens, where a metal detectorist in the UK, he found piles of coins and worth I think he sold them to the British Museum for a lot of money. So
old Roman coins.
Oh.
Yeah, there you go. Roman coins. What is it, 1,500 of them or something?
Something like that, worth millions
Oh
of
my
dollars.
Yeah, millions. And,
So-
you might get out there and you might find one thing,
Right.
which is great. But then there's always that elusive, it's not unlike the lottery. It's like you might win, you might not. Right?
That's right. Take that gamble, perhaps. Take that risk, because it sounds tantalizing. Keith, we're going to put you in the draw for the book. Okay, thank you. Great story.
Thanks so much.
And well told as well. I love that. He was 12. And Brian, you talked about, you heard the story of Slumac and Slumac's gold as children. What was that like for you?
Sitting around a campfire.
Yeah.
I'm 9. This young fellow was 8 at the time.
Uh-huh.
And we're being told ghost stories by an elderly woman. She must have been 40. But when you're 9, it's
That's
a
like
huge
my son
difference.
saying, yeah, that's old.
Yeah. And so she told ghost stories. And then she said, and then up by Pitt Lake, there is a lost gold mine with a curse on it. And whoa, there's about 8 of us sitting around the campfire.
Ears
and
are perked up.
we want to find out more about that. And that began a lifelong quest for us. And in 1970, Mary Traynor came into the partnership with us to do the first book, and has continued all the way through. And it's been a grand quest for all these years.
A grand quest. Rick, can you tell us about some of those grand quests that so many people have tried as well to find this gold?
Well, Keith hit on the camaraderie.
Yeah.
Because it's not just about going out yourself or with a bait to canoe up the lake, as I've done a number of times, or go up Widget Creek and hike. It's about the others who are doing the same thing. And one of the blessings of all of this for Mary and for Brian and myself is we've met a whole bunch of the other gold seekers, and we've had occasions to get together with them, often in a good-sized gathering. By that I mean a dozen of us. And they're legendary in their own way because of their searches and their stories, and the camaraderie plays out in really curious ways. They are prone, when they're with other gold seekers, to share half-truths, hints, misleading guidance. They will, without a doubt, talk about personally saying out loud, I have found Slumac's gold. Now, as we always ask them, did you pocket it? Are you wealthy? And when they're not, we know they haven't actually found it. But they will talk about where they were. And if you have a compass, they're probably a good few points off of accurate. And their willingness to say that they went down a particular canyon, saw a creek from on high, were ready to go down and get to it. They then stop so that nobody knows exactly where they are, because they're afraid that one of the others will go and scoop them.
Wow.
We staked claims. Brian and I staked claims with one of them, with Daryl, in an area that you had to rappel down to. So we never rappelled down there. But those stakes lapsed. In Daryl's view, Brian's view, my view, there could very well be gold on those stakes, which somebody else could now go and stake and go looking for the gold, Sumax gold.
And that's the compelling bit. Nobody knows. Everybody loves gold. Yes. Everybody loves lost gold. Everybody loves lost gold with a curse. And that's the compelling bit.
Exactly. And that it stays lost, I think, is so compelling, right? We have an email from Joe who writes, in Jasper, Alberta in the 1970s, a young lady stayed at the hostel on Malign Lake Road by Malign Canyon. She was left behind when her friends all went to town for a Halloween party. One day, she decided to take a shortcut, got lost, and fell into the canyon. Legend says her ghost is sometimes seen on the road at night, still looking for Jasper. In high school, we'd often go looking for her. We never saw her, though. But would you say the gold perhaps is the friends we made along the way?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I would agree completely.
Let's see.
You know, I signed one of our books to a friend, fellow writer, Susan. We were together with another fellow that we've known since grade school days. And in the book, I signed that the real gold is in the friendship.
Oh, wow.
And I think that is a truism. And some of those, among them scoundrels, among them academics that we have encountered in our research, are some dear friends to this day who would not trust us with the truth.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But you are friends and dear friends at that. You would call them
but
that.
We are also chroniclers. And while we say there was no curse, you know, it probably was, as Brian indicated, within a handful of years after Slumac was hanged, that people were talking about there being a curse, talking about him having had gold, talking about maybe he just didn't come out as loud as once into the 1930s,
right,
as a sort of sensational magazine stories began to portray him. But perhaps there is truth to this. Perhaps there is gold in the Pitt Lake area. It's just waiting to be found. So we've created many new maps in the book, in the Slumax Gold book, in this rendition of it, and lots of new stories, lots of new rumors, and some of them could lead someone to finding the gold.
You're so good at that, at just hinting at what could possibly be.
Cheese.
Exactly. Oh, my goodness. Let's take another call asking you for your own stories. You can tease us with your own stories, too. What are those stories you grew up with? Mine was at school in Manila. I was told there was a ghost living in this one room in the corner of this third floor. My piano lessons happened to be in the room just beside, of course. And so I would rush over to play piano, and my teacher would often leave me alone. And the piano playing was very nervous for those stretches of time, for sure. I'd love to hear from you, too. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Alan is up next now in Vancouver. Hi, Alan.
Hello. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. What's the story that you grew up with?
Well, I guess I was in my early 20s, or maybe even a little before. I was driving across the United States, and I had planned to visit my very favorite aunt in Hollywood, California, and I was almost there. And when I arrived, I walked up to the door, and a neighbor came over and said, "Oh, did you not know that she passed away?" And she literally had passed away a day previously to my arriving. And she was my favorite aunt. Every time she would come to visit, she would actually stay in my room. So we were very close. And so I said to the neighbor, "Is it possible that I could go in?" Because it turned out that he had keys. So he let me in, and I walked into the living room, and I had this distinct feeling that there was something or something hovering above me. And I looked up towards the ceiling, and I got this strong, strong presence of my aunt there. And it was almost, I felt this tremendous feeling, besides, of course, that I was very sad, that she had passed, and that she was there. She was there waiting for me to arrive. And we had this kind of unconscious, very conscious on my part, but like not an actual conversation, but it was the strongest feeling of her presence. And she said, "It's okay, Alan, I'm in a very nice place." I mean, she just made it clear that everything was all right, and she was so glad that I was there.
Oh, what a beautiful story, Alan. Anything you want to share about your aunt?
Well, my aunt was she was a very, very intelligent person. She had multiple kinds of occupations. She had worked in the movies. She had worked, she just did numerous things. She had all kinds of stories all the time when we would visit. And I just loved her dearly.
Oh, that's wonderful. Alan, thank you very much. And that reminds me, again, in so many cultures in the Philippines, Halloween is All Souls Day, and you visit people who you love and who have passed. So I appreciate your sharing that story. Thank you very much for that. Let's take another call here. And if Aaron is ready to go in Vancouver. Hi, Aaron, are you there?
Hello.
Hi. Thanks so much for calling. What's the story that you grew up with?
I just want to talk about the Pitt River area.
Aha, okay. Have you been, and have you looked for gold?
I've been to the Five Fingers group and the Fire Spires group and hiked from Pitt River to Stave Glacier and all over that Burke Mountain, bushwhack, everywhere. Always with that story in the back of my mind. And I've just have to say, I've seen about 500 tent-shaped rocks.
Yes.
Lots of rocks.
Yeah.
Any gold? Any
Good
gold?
luck. No gold. No gold. Except, like you said before, the experience was worth it.
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. And have you come across Rick and Brian before?
I've been up to Pitt River Lodge, and we had a chat there many years ago after the filming of that little series of the gold, the gold show, and they thought they might have found something, they wouldn't lead on. So.
They weren't quite letting on, but it's the adventure, is it, Aaron? It's the adventure.
Exactly.
Yeah. Great to hear from you. Thanks very much for sharing that.
No problem. Take care.
That's Aaron in Vancouver. That brings me to it's such a story of BC as well. You take us there, right? You take us to not just the history, but geographically, how beautiful it is and how hard it might be to traverse. Can you tell me about that part of it, Brian?
It's wild country up there, and thus, when people go into wild country, they can have an accident. They can fall off a cliff. They can break their leg on a trail, tripping over a rock or whatever. And so to suddenly attribute something so natural to a curse, that's happened a lot over the last 130 years.
Course, yeah.
But the country is beautiful. The mountains are high. The slopes are vertical in many cases. There's glaciers. There's all sorts of, there's deep forest down below. There's thinner forest as you get up high and so on. And I say that only from having seen the pictures, because I've never been brave enough to go up there looking myself. But it's wonderful, wonderful country. And it's just a few miles away from Vancouver.
Yeah, can you imagine that? Let's take another call. I'm going to fit in Janet in Gibsons now. A lot of people want this book, I think. Hi, Janet.
Hi.
Thanks for calling. Is there a story you want to share with us?
Well, yeah, I was telling your screener. I went up there in 1971 with my boyfriend. Looking for the gold. We'd heard about it. We found a book, Slumax Gold. We read it and said, "Let's go look for it." And so up we went. We took a canoe. We paddled up the lake to the top of the lake.
Well done.
And portaged up inland. And also, I remember it being very, very wide open. I don't remember any deep gorges. We just we weren't seriously looking for the gold. We were just like having a good time.
With a wink, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and we didn't find it. But I was telling the screener, I saw my first clear cut up close back then, and that left an impression on me. I'd gone to high school in Vernon. Earlier, I'd lived in Ontario and was sort of back and forth between the East Coast and this coast. So, I remember being quite impressed with it. And there was a lot back then.
Yeah.
I think it's grown in a lot, and they're hopefully a little more careful about clear cutting. But it was quite the impression, and that's all I really remember.
That
I can tell you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And it's again, you're looking for gold, but what is that gold, right? And it could be the friendship, and perhaps for you, that impression that seeing that clear cut had on you. I mean, you remember it so vividly right now.
that stands out above all else, I think.
Yeah.
Even though my relationship did develop, and unfortunately, this boyfriend I heard lately he passed away, but he I think he liked the idea of the curse. He was very he really thought we might find it, but we weren't really serious.
Janet,
I sure would
It
like
could
to
be
have that
true. We've got an anonymous quote in the book. We couldn't source it properly, but it says, all you need to find a lost gold mine is a good map and good luck. And we have created a handful or more additional maps of the area so that the context, the perspective, the way to get there is available now. The information is available. One needs to bring their own luck. And of course, we should add in, bring one's own caution. One shouldn't go into this area unless they are prepared, they understand wilderness, they've got the right equipment with them, people know where they are going, and they've left behind messages of when they're going to be coming back out. Because it is dangerous to go looking for Slumac's gold, but it's also compelling when you look at the maps in the book. You sense that it's maybe going to be doable, and you might be the one.
that's a very good caveat. And in my last minute here, what then do you want people to take from the story?
The story is ongoing. It's not going to slow down. This book is our capstone edition, but people will be following up on it. And there will be more searches and more books and more television shows and so on. So it's an ongoing quest.
It's an ongoing quest. Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
I would add that behind every legend is the first person who told it. And there's an element of truth in most every legend any of us ever comes across. So there could be gold in the Pit Lake area, and Slumac could be tied to it. And while we've got loads of research done, the fact that no one has found it is what keeps the legend alive.
And it keeps going. Thank you so much, you two. What a pleasure to have you both.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
Rick and Brian Antonson, co-authors along with Mary Trainer of Slumac's Gold in Search of a Legend and a Curse. Congratulations to Keith and Alan. You each get a copy of the book. Thanks for all of your wonderful stories. Really glad to hear them. We're going to keep going with Halloween. Tomorrow we talk about Halloween costumes.